You know what happens when you're the last person at a house party and suddenly realize everyone else coupled up and left? That moment when you're holding a warm beer, looking at empty pizza boxes, understanding that you're alone without anyone saying a word. That's the exact feeling most men live with every day in their relationships. Abandoned while she's still sitting right next to them. Today, I'm giving you the verbal nuclear codes that will flip this dynamic instantly. But here's the thing. These words are so powerful, so devastating, that 97% of you will be too scared to ever use them. And that's exactly why you'll stay stuck in the same miserable loop forever. He has watched that scene play out in real life more times than he can count. Not at house parties, but inside living rooms, in car rides after dinner, and in the quiet minutes before sleep. A man starts a relationship feeling steady. He laughs easily, he has his own rhythm, his own friends, his own weekends. And then, little by little, his spine turns into a question mark. At first it looks harmless. He begins to check in more often. He edits his jokes so they do not cause tension. He cancels plans because he does not want an argument. And because the relationship still has good days, he tells himself it is normal. That is the first trap. When a small sacrifice is rewarded with peace, the brain labels surrender as love. From there, the pattern usually accelerates. A woman he is dating can be warm and affectionate, and then suddenly cold for no obvious reason. She is not screaming. She is not breaking things. She is simply withdrawing. Short answers, distant eyes, a phone that becomes more interesting than his voice. He feels the shift like a temperature drop, and he panics. So he tries harder. He buys more. He texts longer. He explains himself again and again, until the explanation becomes a lifestyle. And then the sick irony shows up. He believes he is proving devotion, but what he is actually proving is fear. He is not demonstrating commitment. He is demonstrating that his emotional stability depends on her approval. The more he begs for comfort, the more she loses respect. And when respect weakens, attraction follows it down like a shadow. That is why the next moment is so predictable. She hints at leaving. Sometimes she does it directly, maybe we should break up. Sometimes she does it indirectly, I don't know if this is working. In the beginning, he responds like a reasonable adult. He asks what is wrong. He offers solutions. But after enough cycles, he becomes a negotiator trapped in a bad hostage situation. He promises change, he apologizes for things he did not do, and he starts to shrink to fit her mood. As that shrinking continues, he stops being the man she originally noticed. He becomes a manager of her emotions. He becomes the person who tries to prevent storms instead of building a life. And the strangest part is that he often becomes proud of it. He calls it being a good boyfriend. He calls it being mature. He calls it love. But the relationship does not reward him for that. It punishes him. Every time he trades his self-respect for temporary peace, the dynamic shifts. It becomes less about two adults choosing each other, and more about one person chasing and the other person deciding whether to allow it. That is the hidden mechanism behind a lot of modern relationship chaos. It is not about flowers, money, height, or the perfect date. It is about power, boundaries, and the emotional gravity inside the room. And in most couples, that gravity changes the moment one person becomes afraid of losing the other. To understand why, it helps to follow a single story from the start. Imagine a man named Adrian. He is not a villain and he is not a hero. He is simply competent. He has a job he respects, a small circle of friends, and a habit of going to the gym after work. He meets a woman named Lena at a friend's gallery opening. She is confident, socially sharp, and she can charm a room without trying. The first weeks feel effortless. Then the first test appears, even if neither of them calls it that. One night Adrian says he will meet his friends for an hour. Lena responds with a playful tone, "Sure, go have fun," but her eyes are colder than her words. Adrian notices the mismatch, and the uneasy feeling begins. He could ignore it. He could keep his plan. But he wants harmony, so he cancels. Lena smiles again. Adrian feels relief. His brain learns the lesson. When he gives up a piece of himself, she becomes sweet. A few weeks later it happens again. Adrian makes a comment that would be normal in any healthy relationship, like, "He might be late, traffic is bad." Lena twists it into a complaint, "So you're saying I'm not important?" Adrian becomes confused. He explains. He over-explains. He apologizes for a meaning he never intended. The tension fades. Again, his brain learns. Explanation buys peace. Months pass. The sacrifices get larger. The misunderstandings become more frequent. Adrian stops inviting certain friends around because Lena does not like them. Adrian stops posting certain things online because Lena will interpret it as disrespect. Adrian begins to ask before doing simple things, not because he wants permission, but because he wants to avoid the familiar cold silence. The relationship becomes a small country, and he starts acting like a citizen. And that is the moment this video is really about. Not the dates, not the arguments. The moment a man becomes a citizen in his own life. This is also the moment most men misunderstand. They think the solution is to become even kinder, even more giving, even more patient. They believe love means never making her uncomfortable. But the uncomfortable truth is that a certain kind of woman, especially one who is intelligent, socially aware, and used to being pursued, often responds to endless comfort with boredom. She does not say it out loud. She just begins to drift. That drift is what terrifies men. Because drifting is ambiguous. It feels like dying slowly. And when a man feels a slow death, he becomes desperate. And when he becomes desperate, he becomes easy to control. So what is actually happening? One explanation is something people loosely call testing. But not in the cartoon way men imagine. Not as a conscious evil plan. More often it is a subconscious scanning process. A person wants to know, can he stay stable when she is emotional? Can he handle pressure without collapsing? Can she respect him when he is challenged? The test is not a trick. It is a search for stability. Here is the paradox. When he fails, she often feels safer in the short term because she can predict him. But she feels less desire in the long term because she cannot admire him. Safety without admiration becomes comfort without chemistry. That is why a relationship can feel peaceful and still feel dead. This is why the nice guy pattern collapses so often. He thinks he is building closeness by surrendering. But he is actually teaching her that his boundary is flexible, his standards are negotiable, and his emotions can be steered with silence. He becomes reliable in the wrong way, reliably controllable. There is another metaphor that makes this easier to see. A relationship is like a stage. Someone is always setting the tone. Someone is choosing the pace. Someone is deciding what is allowed. In a healthy couple, both people share that. But in an unhealthy couple, one person becomes the director and the other person becomes the actor trying to please the director. The moment he starts auditioning for love, the audition never ends. So the question becomes simple. What words can stop that audition? Because words are not magic, but they reveal something deeper. They reveal the man's internal posture. And certain phrases signal one thing very clearly. He will not trade his dignity for affection. That is why certain words can feel frightening to a woman who is used to controlling the emotional thermostat. Not because she is evil. Not because women are bad. But because those words remove leverage. They end the cycle where tension is a weapon. The first phrase is not an insult. It is a boundary spoken calmly. He will talk when there is respect. In real life it sounds like this. He can have the conversation when it stays respectful, and if it turns into threats or insults, he is stepping away. Notice what that does. It does not attack her. It does not beg. It sets a rule, and then it follows the rule. And this is where most men fail. They say a boundary, but they do not enforce it. They say he is leaving the room, and then he stays. They say he is done, and then he keeps talking. The words do not matter if the posture collapses 2 seconds later. The power is in consistency. So imagine Adrian again. Lena starts a fight late at night. She raises her voice. She starts using phrases like, "you always," "you never," and she slips in the classic threat, "maybe I should just leave." Adrian's old self would panic. He would try to fix it. But this time he does something different. He says calmly that he is not going to have a relationship discussion in the middle of the night when emotions are hot. He says he is going to sleep, and they can talk tomorrow. And then he actually goes to sleep. That single move is more powerful than any clever insult, because it tells her his nervous system belongs to him. The second phrase is a refusal to negotiate with ultimatums. He does not respond to threats. In practice it sounds like this: if she truly wants to leave, he will respect her decision, but he will not bargain against a breakup threat. That sentence is like turning off a machine. It removes the reward for dramatic escalation. A lot of men misunderstand this and turn it into cruelty. They say it to punish. That is not the point. The point is emotional clarity. If a breakup is on the table, then it is real. If it is not real, then it should not be used as a tool. A man who respects himself does not live under a threat. The third phrase is the one that changes everything, because it flips the frame. It is no longer about how he can keep her. It becomes about whether she qualifies to be in his life. He begins to evaluate, not beg. The shift can be simple. He pays attention to patterns. He notices that when she is unhappy, she becomes disrespectful. He notices that when he sets a boundary, she punishes him with silence. He notices whether she takes accountability or only apologizes when she fears consequences. When a woman senses that he is watching patterns instead of chasing mood swings, she loses the ability to control him with chaos. Chaos only works when the other person is emotionally addicted to relief. This leads to the next sentence that can feel dangerous. He is okay if it ends. Again, not as a threat, not as a bluff, but as a truth. The tone matters more than the words. When it is real, it does not sound dramatic. It sounds quiet. It sounds like a man who knows he will be fine. That is what most people do not understand about attraction. It is not only about excitement. It is also about the sense that the other person has a life, a backbone, and a future with or without validation. Independence is not the absence of love. It is the foundation that makes love voluntary instead of desperate. And once that foundation is set, a man can use a tool that is far more effective than arguing: agreement without submission. When she says he never cares, he does not defend himself for 30 minutes. He might say he understands that she feels that way, and then he asks one clear question: what specifically needs to change? If she cannot answer, the conversation ends. He does not chase vague accusations. This does two things. It shows emotional maturity, and it forces reality into the room. Vague drama cannot survive in the presence of specific questions. Another phrase that removes leverage is direct and clean. He will not be spoken to that way. Many men avoid that line because they fear losing her. But that fear is exactly what creates the disrespect. When she senses that he will tolerate anything to keep her, she has no reason to manage herself. So again, picture Adrian. Lena complains that he is boring and predictable. She says it to stab him, to see if he will bleed. If he begs, she learns she can stab again. If he explodes, she learns she can push him into childish anger and then claim he is the problem. But if he stays calm and says he is open to feedback and still will not accept disrespect, he blocks both outcomes. There is nothing to feed on. At this point, some women will escalate. That escalation is actually useful information. If her only response to a boundary is more disrespect, she is not looking for partnership. She is looking for control. And the boundary has just revealed it. That is where many men need a reality check. The goal is not to win against a woman. The goal is to build a relationship where both people can be healthy. Sometimes the healthiest thing a man can do is let a controlling dynamic end. But here is the twist. In many cases, the boundary does not end the relationship. It improves it. Because a stable woman does not want a weak man. She wants a man she can trust. And trust does not come from him being endlessly agreeable. Trust comes from him being consistent. So what about the phrase men are tempted to use, the one that tries to bruise her ego? A lot of online advice encourages harsh comparisons, insults, and humiliation. That kind of talk can get attention, but it usually creates a toxic bond. It is not strength, it is aggression wearing a costume. A stronger man does not need to insult. He can communicate a standard without cruelty. If he wants to express disappointment, he can say he expected better, and then he backs it with action. Action is the language that cannot be argued with. That action often looks like reducing availability. Not to play games, but to protect focus. When he senses disrespect, he does not reward it with extra time and affection. He becomes less accessible. He invests more in his work, his friends, his health. He stops acting like she is the sun and he is a planet begging for warmth. And here is why that matters. Many relationships become suffocating because the man's entire emotional world is attached to one person. When she becomes the center, she becomes a pressure point. She can hurt him with a glance. She can control his day with a short text. That is not romance. That is dependence. A woman feels that dependence, even if she cannot name it. She feels the weight of being responsible for his self-esteem. And that weight quietly kills desire. Desire wants freedom. Desire wants the sense that the other person has an internal engine. So the next phrase that matters is not even spoken to her. It is spoken to himself as a decision. He will not abandon his life. That decision changes everything. It changes his calendar. It changes his posture. It changes the way he walks into a room. Because when he does not abandon his life, he stops negotiating from fear. He can listen to her complaints without collapsing. He can admit mistakes without groveling. He can say no without feeling guilt. And those are the traits that create respect. Now, some people will ask whether this is manipulation. It depends on intent. If he is performing a character to control her, then he is still trapped in the same power game. But if he is rebuilding his self-respect and living like a whole person, then it is simply maturity. Healthy boundaries are not manipulation. They are self-protection. This is why the most dangerous moment in a relationship is not the argument. It is the moment after the argument, when she watches what he does. Words during the fight can be forgotten. But his pattern becomes her reality. If he chases after being disrespected, he teaches her that disrespect works. If he stays calm, sets a rule, and follows it, he teaches her that drama has no reward. That is why the so-called words women fear are not really words. They are signals. They are the signals of a man who cannot be bought with affection and cannot be bullied with tension. To make this change stick, he also has to understand something most people ignore. The nervous system leads the relationship before the mind does. If he is constantly anxious, even perfect words will sound needy. That is why the real work is not memorizing lines. It is building a calm baseline. So he starts with small, concrete habits. He stops replying instantly out of fear. He gives himself time to think. He keeps his routines even when she is unhappy. He sleeps, he trains, he works, and he maintains friendships that existed before the relationship. Each of those is a silent message. He is not a man who disappears into romance. Then he cleans up the way he communicates. He avoids long emotional speeches. He does not send paragraphs at 2 a.m. trying to prove his intentions. He does not argue about feelings as if feelings are court evidence. Instead, he speaks in short, simple sentences. What he will do, what he will not do, and what happens next. The shorter and calmer he becomes, the less fuel there is for drama. At the same time, he stays honest about his own mistakes. Strength is not denial. If he breaks a promise, he owns it. If he hurts her, he apologizes. But he does not apologize for having standards. He does not apologize for saying no. And he never apologizes just to make tension stop. An apology that is used as a tranquilizer turns into resentment later, and resentment always leaks. When he builds that kind of internal leadership, something interesting happens. Even if she is the same woman, the relationship becomes a different environment. The air changes. The pace changes. She can still have emotions, but her emotions no longer control the entire household. That is what a healthy woman actually wants. A man who can hold the frame without becoming cruel. To make this concrete, consider a few everyday scenarios. In the first scenario, she goes silent for 2 days after a small disagreement. Adrian's old self would send 10 messages, trying to repair the mood. His new self sends one message. He hopes she is okay, and when she is ready to talk respectfully, he is available. Then he goes on with his day. He does not punish. He does not beg. He refuses to chase silence. In the second scenario, she flirts with attention from other men to trigger jealousy. His old self would compete. His new self watches and makes a decision. If she wants to behave like she is single, he will not fight for a place in her life. He will step back. That is not insecurity. That is standards. In the third scenario, she criticizes him in front of friends. His old self would laugh it off and feel humiliated later. His new self addresses it privately and clearly. He does not accept being disrespected in public. If it happens again, he will remove himself from that situation and rethink the relationship. Then he follows through if needed. In the fourth scenario, she uses intimacy as leverage. She becomes affectionate only when she wants something, and cold when she does not. His old self would become a salesman for affection. His new self sees it as a red flag. He does not punish her. He stops rewarding the pattern. He invests his emotional energy where it is reciprocated. Each scenario is simple, but they all share the same principle. A man's peace is not a bargaining chip. When a woman meets that kind of stability, one of two things happens. A healthy woman relaxes, because she is with a man who can handle pressure. She becomes softer, because she does not need to control. But an unhealthy woman becomes frustrated, because her usual tools stop working. She may escalate, accuse, or try to shame him. That reaction is not a mystery. It is withdrawal from a power source. This is where many men will be tempted to get cruel. They will want to teach her a lesson. They will want revenge for months of disrespect. But revenge keeps him chained to the same dynamic. The higher move is to stay calm and choose the outcome that protects his future. Because the end goal is not to dominate a woman. The end goal is to become the kind of man who cannot be dominated. And that brings the story back to the beginning, to that feeling of being abandoned in the middle of a room. That feeling does not come from a lack of romance. It comes from a lack of self-respect. When a man respects himself, he does not tolerate the slow abandonment. He addresses it. If it changes, he stays. If it does not, he leaves. He does not beg for a seat at the table. He builds his own table. So if Adrian could go back and give himself one rule at the beginning, it would be simple. He would never trade dignity for affection. He would never let silence, drama, or threats train his behavior. He would treat love like a choice between two adults, not like a prize he has to earn through suffering. And if someone asks what words make a controlling dynamic collapse, the answer is not a clever insult. It is the calm sentence that comes from a strong spine. He will not accept disrespect, and he will not abandon himself to keep anyone. Because once those words are real, the loop breaks. And when the loop breaks, the right woman stays, and the wrong woman disappears. That is the line between misery and freedom. And the only question left is whether he is willing to live on the right side of it.